Okay, well, it's a pleasure to be joining you, sadly virtually, from a wet and windy Cambridge Monday morning here. So my name is Chris Harrison. I'm the publishing director for the Humanities and Social Sciences books section, and along with my colleague Patrick, who you've just heard, we're going to be spending a bit of time with you this morning to first of all, to try and describe in very broad terms the scholarly publishing landscape, to kind of demystify it and to explain a little bit how it works. But for most of the webinar, we're trying to give you some practical tips. First of all, in the world of journals, and Patrick will be talking about how to maximize and optimize your chances of having your papers accepted in journals. And then I'll be talking about the book publishing process and how that works. We're happy to take questions as we go along, and we suggest the way that we do that is if you use the raise hand function in Teams. Otherwise, if you want to type in questions in chat, and we'll come to those at the end of the session. So our colleague Stefano is in charge of the slides, and so we'll be asking him to go through them. But anyway, it's a great pleasure to be with you, and I hope everybody in Tel Aviv in these strangest of times that you and your friends and family are all staying safe and keeping well. So Stefano, if you could just move through the first couple of slides, please. Thanks. So as I said, we're going to talk a little bit about the publishing landscape and also some little bit of information about Cambridge University Press. So the scholarly publishing landscape is a very big one. It's slightly messy, a little bit confusing, but there's some big numbers on this slide here. So previous slide, please, Stefano. So every year, approximately, there are 3 million journal articles published across 33,000 journals, and this is just the English language ones we're talking about. Typically in each year, there are about 200,000 scholarly books published. So there's a huge amount of activity, and it's not surprising that with so much activity, there's actually, it's quite big business. So in the world of STM, science, technology, and medicine publishing, it really is, the numbers are significant. It's an industry that's worth $25 billion per annum. The world of humanities and social sciences that Patrick and I are in, and which I think, if I understand correctly, most of the people on this call are in, is slightly smaller. It's just under $2.5 billion, but still nonetheless substantial. So it's not surprising that with this huge numbers of journals, all this activity, all this investment, that there's a very wide range of publishers and journals. Some of these are very big publishers, such as Elsevier, are kind of really big, strong, powerful companies making lots of money. But some are very small. Some of the publishers that you'll come across are operating out of people's back rooms. So one of the great things about scholarly publishing is that there is room for everybody. And I think one of your challenges is as scholars is to try and understand which of those publishers, which of those journals is going to best fit you. Next slide, please. And one of the main themes that Patrick and I will be talking about is in this very big, noisy world, all these content being published, your big challenge is to make sure that your work is recognizable, it's discoverable, it stands out from the crowd, people will remember it, and it will make a great impact. So that's a recurring theme across both the books and the journals presentations we'll be talking about. So next slide, Stefano, please. So we're all on this call together, part of a scholarly ecosystem. There's the scholars, the funders, whether they were government agencies or research science foundations, the libraries who are our hosts today, and publishers such as Cambridge University Press, and then the learned societies and professional associations that we're all members of. So one of the unique things and one of the great things from our point of view working in this is that we all share a common goal to expand access to the fruits of research. We see that we're involved in producing a public good of kind of knowledge for the service of making the world a better place. So we all interact together. We've all got slightly different functions, but we all see our fates as being closely interconnected. So next slide, please. So it's a landscape which has changed out of all recognition in the last 20 years. And there have been two main drivers for that change. The first of all, the driver of change in so many industries has been technology and the transformation of the publishing industry from one which was based on print to one which is now primarily digital. So the world of journals has long been a digital business. People don't, on the whole, rely on print copies of journals. They go access the digital version via their libraries. They can read those papers anytime, any place. It's no longer as important to have all the paper print versions stacked up on your bookshelf. Digital is becoming more and more important for books. I think in the books world, we're likely to be much more of a mixed economy where both print and digital coexist, and they're both good at doing slightly different things. But we are seeing digital is becoming more important, and particularly in the last few months in the pandemic and the close down, we have seen that libraries are placing much more emphasis now on accessing digital content for books as well. So technology has been a big driver for change, but the other big driver for change, which is really kind of transformational, particularly in journals, but was also important in books, is the open access movement. And Patrick will be talking a lot more about open access in the world of journals and helping you understand and navigate your way through that. That is a massive, massive change. Can't emphasize it enough how much that is really kind of transforming our worlds. We're also seeing, somewhat linked to the open access, the rise of importance of pre-press working papers. So this is academic content that hasn't yet been through the full peer review process, but which scholars like to kind of to put on servers so they can share early versions with their peers, and that content is becoming ever more important. We're also very conscious that we all have to justify our existence, so we all have various metrics that we kind of judge ourselves by. There have been some very traditional metrics in the world of journals, of impact factors, again, that Patrick will be talking about, but we're also aware these days of the importance to think beyond just the very narrow technical calculations of an impact factor. So that's affecting how we go about our business. And at the same time, we as publishers, we have a very strong belief in copyright, but we're also very conscious that there's a lot of free content out there. Some of it is legal and some of it is not quite so legal, but that's a fact of life that we as publishers have to recognize. And there's an interesting argument about exactly what the impact is of all that free content out there. But that's all by way of saying that the landscape has been changing a lot. Within that, Cambridge University Press occupies a fairly unique position. We're very proud of our history. We're very proud to be part of one of the world's great research universities. We are an integral part of the University of Cambridge. They are our bosses. And we've been around like the university for a very long time. We were given our permission to start publishing back in the 16th century by King Henry VIII, the famous king with his 6 wives. We were given permission to start publishing in 1534. For some reason, I never understood why, it took us 50 years to publish our first book, but we've been publishing continuously ever since. We're very, very proud of that heritage and that history, but we're very conscious that actually these days it's much more important to be forward-looking. So we spend most of our time thinking about investing in future business models, particularly in digital and open access. So as a university press, and this slide applies just as much to Oxford or Princeton or Chicago or any university press in the world, we're all part of our parent universities. We share their mission and character. So we're a not-for-profit organisation. This means, in the case of Cambridge, that any profit, or as we call it, surplus that we make from our publishing, we reinvest in our publishing infrastructure, and we also donate to the university. So this is very different, obviously, from a commercial press. Oxford and Cambridge University presses are unique amongst the university presses in that we don't actually receive any funding from our parent university. On the contrary, we are expected to generate funds to plough back into the mission of the university. Most of the North American university presses and most of the university presses you see in continental Europe receive funding and subsidies from their parent university. But Oxford and Cambridge, we are unique in the university press world, expected to generate income for our university. Like our parent university, we see ourselves very much as part of a global community of scholarship, of scholars, and we want to work with the best scholars and the best universities around the world. And that's one of the reasons why we're very keen to do this kind of work, this kind of webinar that we're doing now. We want to really send the signal out loud and clear that, you know, that you should all consider Cambridge as a place to publish your work. As part of the university, one of the world's great research universities, we absolutely share its commitment to research of the highest quality. That's really important to our brand, that people should always know Cambridge University Press and other university press publications should always be above all be known for highest quality standards, and that's always the #1 consideration for us. So we achieve quality by obviously all the time being very conscious that we're part of the parent university, that we mustn't do anything to harm the reputation and the brand of our parent university. We make a big effort to go out and find the best authors, the best journals. We go to lots of conferences, we travel to lots of universities, we do as much outreach as we can. We insist on very high standards of peer review. And at the Cambridge University Press, we have an editorial board, which we call the Press Syndicate. As an old university press, we like to use slightly old-fashioned names for things, but our editorial board is called the Press Syndicate. All university presses have some form of editorial board made up of faculty from the university, from the parent university. At Oxford, they're called the delegates. At Cambridge, they're called the syndics. And on this slide here, you'll see their meeting. We meet every fortnight, and these are professors from all the faculties of the university. And it's only when they have given their approval to a project and they see every single publishing proposal, every single book proposal, every single journal proposal, they see all the referee reports, all the relevant papers. It's only when they have given their approval that we can offer an author or a journal editor or society a contract to publish. It's a very democratic system, and it applies to all authors. It applies to Nobel Prize winners, and it applies to young postdocs. And that's really crucial to how we kind of maintain our quality. So as I say, the editorial board is something which is common across all university presses. At Cambridge, as I say, just has this slightly odd name. Stefano, I think we're going to skip the next 2 slides, and I think at this stage I'm going to hand over to Patrick, who's going to talk about journals.
Good, thank you, Chris. And I hope everybody can hear me. I'm talking from London, actually, and not like Chris from Cambridge. So greetings to you all. I'm the publishing director for humanities and social science journals. I don't know if there are any of you that come to this from a science background, but if you do, there's no harm in that at all. Many of the same principles apply, and I'll be happy to answer any questions on that. Right, let's move on to the first slide, Stefano. Okay, so the key thing here is to make a distinction between books and journals. They share so much in common, but obviously there are areas in which there are quite significant differences as well, and those are some of the things that I'm going to try and tease out. I was going to say this morning, but obviously it's this afternoon in Tel Aviv. Right, so you have decided to write a journal article that emerges from your research. So you've reached a point, you've brought this small body of work together, and you've done a great deal of work to get there. Now, the next stage in this is terribly important, because the last thing you want to do is to kind of waste all of that effort and not put it to the best possible use. And this is where choosing a journal article is so important. Which type of journal do you choose? What area is it in? Is it a general journal, or is it a specific journal? These are the kinds of things that are going to dominate your thinking. And the thing that I would say to you in this respect, and obviously we will touch on a few of these themes a little later, but the key thing is, first of all, talk to your advisor. You know, who was your thesis advisor in all of this? Do you know other people in the area? Ask them what they think might be the most appropriate journal. Take a look at your bibliography and see which journals did you quote most, which journals did you cite most. And then once you've identified a few journals, go and look and see who the editors and the editorial board members are, and see if they are people whose work you recognize, whose work you feel might be in the area that you're writing in. So put your time to good use, and in that way you will come closest to identifying the optimal journal for you to submit to. Right, next, Stefano. Thanks. So this is just repeat some of what I've said before about where to look. Another thing that you need to be thinking really carefully about, and I'd encourage this right from the outset, is think very, very carefully about your title and your abstract, because you must remember there are a number of reasons why you're publishing this article. One of those is to be read. And if you want to be read, you want to send very clear signals about what your article is all about. And that will be revealed in the title, and it will be revealed in the abstract. So do, once you've written up your article, think very carefully about how you can capture the essence of that article. Right, before I go on, it's probably worth just focusing for a minute on what the definition of a scholarly journal is, what the functions of a scholarly journal are. So this gentleman whose picture you see here, Henry Oldenburg, identified in 1664 or 1665, we're not quite sure, but thereabouts, he identified 3 technological problems that any single journal article aimed to solve. The first one was registration, the ownership of an idea. So in writing an article, what you are doing is you are saying, that is my intellectual property. You own that idea, or the way that idea has been expressed, or the way in which you have brought data together. That's awfully important. The second thing is dissemination. So what you're seeking to do, and I alluded to this a little earlier, is you're seeking to disseminate it as widely as possible. You want to spread the learning that you have spent so much time generating, and it's to achieve recognition for yourself and for your ideas, and to advance your career. The third is archiving. That is creating a permanent record, or in other words, providing a store where that idea can be held. Then subsequently, 2 additional cultural functions have developed over time. The first is the most important. In many ways, perhaps the most important of all 5 of these, and that is providing quality assurance. Chris spoke a little about quality earlier, and I think it's just worth emphasizing the degree to which, in publishing any of your journal articles, what we're doing is we're not conferring quality on you by simply publishing it ourselves. We're conferring quality on that journal article because we have had it peer reviewed, because quality has been conferred by the external assessment of that article. And of course, this is central to everything that we do. And then finally, filtration, which is really all about navigating all the sea of information. I spoke earlier about using the bibliography, about just helping to shape and direct the research that you're doing. So those are the essential elements of a scholarly journal, the basic functions that they perform. Right, Stefano, the next one. So this slide, I don't want to spend a great deal of time on it, but in many ways, what this slide shows you is this notion of positive feedback, the way in which an author and a journal publisher come together to assume that we achieve as many positive things as possible in publishing your article. So you submit an article to us in the middle of the circle there. We get it peer reviewed by the best people. We help to improve the quality of it. And we then publish your article. If we publish a high quality article, what it helps to do is to increase the citations that you will get. If we get an increase in citations, we will get an increase in usage and readership. Any increase in usage and readership, of course, is going to feed back again and is going to increase citations. And both of those are going to help to increase the impact of the journal. Now, that may be in the form of an impact factor, which we'll talk about later. It may be in the form of, it might be incorporated in some policy. So these are the ways in which we work together to improve quality, which in itself increases usage, readership, citations, and impact. And next, please, Stefano. Right, I want to briefly talk to you and introduce this idea of different business models. And we're going to spend a bit of time on this, but just for the purposes of introduction, we're in a phase now in journals publishing where we're effectively shifting from one business model to another. The business model we're shifting from is a subscription business model. And that's a business model where the reader pays an annual subscription to the publisher. Now, at Tel Aviv University, your librarian will be paying a subscription to the journal, or would have been paying a subscription to the journal. Under this model rather, you, the author, or the reader, the author bears no cost at all as an author. And this has for some time been the dominant business model in humanities and social sciences. Now, this reader pays business model, but the reader here, remember, is the librarian. This is being replaced by open access. And very broadly, I'd like you to think in terms of open access, just for the moment, as being an author pays system. So in other words, a reader pays under subscription is being replaced by an author pays. And this payment is generally by a vehicle that we refer to as an article processing charge. So you as an author submit an article to a journal, that article is accepted, you pay a sum of money, let's say it's $2,000 for argument's sake, and on payment of that $2,000, if your article is deemed to be high enough quality, we will publish it, and no one will then be prevented from reading the article. Whereas under the subscription model, it is only those libraries that have paid the subscription that can read it. Okay, so that's the essential difference between the two. Next one, Stefano. So a little more now about open access. Next. It is, as you might imagine, it's a relatively complex world, and I just want to focus in on a few of its key elements here. And Chris mentioned this earlier, that if you've got any questions, either hold up your hand now or put them in the chat and we'll deal with them afterwards. Indeed, we'll also be happy to answer some of the more complex questions via email. So open access. Remember, you've paid an article processing charge. It is now freely available on the internet. So anybody with access to the internet can read it wherever they are. It permits readers or users rather to read, to download, to copy, to print, to search. It allows spiders to crawl the articles for indexing. And by spiders here, I'm talking about these crawlers, so-called crawlers that Google uses, for example, to index data and to index articles. And also anybody else is able to use these articles for whichever purpose, for whichever legal purpose they wish. So suddenly what is happening here with an article is it's being freed up for much more general use, and indeed for much more general copying and distribution. Next, Stefano. Right, now I mentioned earlier in making the distinction between the subscription model and the open access model, I mentioned article processing charges. So article processing charges, in fact, only apply to one particular type of open access, and that is gold open access. There are two other types of open access, so there are three altogether. I focused initially on gold and article processing charges because this is likely to become very much the dominant form of open access, and I think it's the one that we will really be looking to in the future to provide the vast majority of open access. But we're in an interregnum at the moment. We're in a period where, as I said, we're shifting from the reader pays model to the author pays model, from a subscription model to an open access model. And in any interregnum, we find there is a little bit of confusion, there's a bit of mess, we haven't arrived at an entirely neat and tidy solution yet. So we have three different types of open access publishing. We've got gold, that is free online immediately on publication, and this is the article processing charge, where an article processing charge is paid. The second is what we refer to as green open access. The key distinction between green and gold is that no APC is paid for green open access, and green open access does not refer to the version of record that is published in a journal. It refers to open access to the article that you submitted to the journal. That is before peer review, or rather immediately after peer review, the one before it is typeset. So once an article has been, you submit an article, it is peer reviewed, corrections are made to it, it is then called an accepted manuscript, and it is that accepted manuscript which is made open access. I don't want to spend any time talking about diamond OA because it doesn't, there is no fee involved, it is merely subsidized OA. So if somebody says to a publisher, oh, I'll give you N thousands of dollars in order to publish this, but this article for, so that you can put it free online, then that is referred to as diamond. But it's not that important. I'm going to come back to open access, but I just want to refer here to copyrights and licenses now, which are changing very, very fast. Before you sign any license to publish or to transfer your copyright, be very clear about what you're signing. Most publishers will present you with a form and will just ask you to sign it. So in most cases, that will be the right thing to do, but you should not do it without reading that form very carefully, because this is where you assert your ownership. Remember that initial function of a journal, the assertion of your ownership. This is where you do that. You want to be very clear about who owns your work. You want to be very clear about the rights you retain, and you want to be very clear about who has the right to distribute and to sell it. So pay very careful attention to it. Now, one of the key aspects of the difference between the old world, that is the subscription world, and the new world, which is the open access world, is different types of licenses apply. In the old world, what you tended to do was you tended to give the copyright over to the publisher, or at least give them an exclusive license to publish. And in that way, what the publisher did, for the most part, certainly well-behaved publishers, was to attempt to protect your work and to distribute it fairly, and to really look after your interests in publishing the work. With the open access world, we begin to introduce something that we call Creative Commons licenses. And the acronym for these is CC BY licenses. Now, there are a number of CC BY licenses, and I've just listed them in this slide. You should refer to them. These are licenses that are very much the product of the open access world. If you decide that your article should be published open access, or indeed if you publish in a journal which determines that it must be open access, one of these licenses will apply. You should understand what that license means and the limitations that it places on you. That said, the most common license that you will encounter is the very general license, the CC BY license, the one at the top. And that license allows anybody that reads the article to copy, to distribute, to display, to perform the work, and to make derivative works and remixes. The only thing they need to do is to attribute the article and the ownership of that article to you. So in other words, what they need to do is to acknowledge you as the author of the article. Now, all of the other CC BY licenses that follow, the share alike, the non-commercial, and the non-derivative, are all they are variations of the CC BY license, and they are all licenses that give you, the author, a little bit more control. So you can read those, and I think they're all self-explanatory. Right, Stefano. So gold open access. Let's just dip a little bit more into this. Remember, you pay a fee to the journal for gold open access, or indeed your library, if it has an agreement with the publisher, may pay a fee on your behalf. So remember that it's not this notion of an article processing charge doesn't mean that the money has to come from you. It can come from a funder, or it could come from your library. Access is free and immediate to the public. The use of it will be dependent on the license that you published. The fee will be dependent on the fee that the publisher determined. Right, next one. So remember that gold open access refers to the version of record, that is the version that the publisher has intervened with, the one that has been typeset, that has been copy edited, etc., the one that appears on the publisher's website. Green open access, and I made this distinction a little earlier, refers to the accepted manuscript, the one that you submit to the author for copy editing and typesetting, etc. So it is not the final version of the article. And remember again that there is no article processing charge. There is no fee involved with green open access. Green open access is in fact a mechanism to make an early version of the article freely available within a subscription model. So in many ways, it is a version of open access that exists in this interregnum, moving from the subscription model to the gold open access model. Right, and next. Okay, I'll very briefly just, and Chris is going to talk more about this later, but you just have a very clear idea And some of you may not have published an article before, some of you may be going through the process now, but be very clear about the process here. You submit an article to us, an editor of a journal will look at it and say, this is appropriate for my journal or not. And remember that that editor will be an academic editor. It won't be somebody based at a publishing house. It'll be somebody at, Tel Aviv University or the Hebrew University in Jerusalem or Harvard or Cambridge or wherever. The editor will screen the paper. The editor will say, I like the look of this paper, or I don't think this paper is appropriate. If they like the look of it, the editor will send it out to reviewers. The reviews will come in. The reviews will either say publish, don't publish, or publish with changes. So this is the vast majority of articles are published with changes. You then begin an interaction with the editor to reach a point where the article is either finally accepted or is not accepted. So this is a process which is very similar to books, and that is a process, if you haven't published before, that you can look forward to experiencing. Next one, okay. Peer review. Now, just remember that all journals apply different types of peer review. And remember how this is so important to conferring authority on the journal. It's not just simply an editor saying, I like the look of this. It's not just simply a publisher saying, I like the look of this. This is a process by independent authorities, people who are authorities in the particular area in which you're writing, to establish the quality of this article, the degree to which it makes a contribution to the literature. You can look forward to 3 different types of peer review. One is single blind. That is where the journal will never reveal to you the identity of the where the reviewer will never know your identity as an author. So I beg your pardon, let me start again. Single blind is you don't know who the reviewers are, but the reviewer knows who you are. Double blind, you don't know the reviewers, and the journal has anonymized your identity, so the reviewer doesn't know who you are. Open peer review dispenses with both of those. That is where a review is placed on the internet, so you know the reviewer's identity and the reviewer knows you. In the humanities and social sciences, single blind is very common, but double blind is also pretty common as well. You very seldom find double blind in the sciences. It tends to be single blind. Open is an experimental form of peer review and is becoming much more common now, both in social science journals and in science journals. Next, Stefano. Right, so this is publishing ethics. And Stefano, you know what, I think we might skip over this because this requires a bit of intervention from you. If you just flick through each of those, yeah. So I'm not going to take you through this exercise, but what I think I will do is just refer you to a couple of issues in publishing ethics that you need to consider. And we will add, I think I'll just add something to our slides or point you to a bit of our website. But this is something that's rather easier to do if I'm in control of the slides, which I am not. So we will promise to add something on this, just to give you a steer. Okay, so just one other thing about a couple of other issues about publishing ethics in respect of journal articles. You can never ever submit an article to 2 journals at the same time, only to one. And if you are rejected by one, then you can send it to another, but never 2 or never more than 1. Be very, very careful about plagiarism. Sometimes it is not anything you are actively doing, it's rather something that you did but in error because you didn't take careful notes or whatever. But be very, very careful about this. It can destroy careers. Be very careful about conflicts of interest. And by conflict of interest, I mean, if you've received funding money from somebody, you need to reveal any interests that you may have in terms of funding, in terms of family, in terms of anything. If you feel there's any conflict of interest there, it should be revealed. So let me just leave publishing ethics at that. As I said, we will provide some more information later. Next, Stefano. Okay. Predatory journals. Now, I don't want to say a great deal about this now, but one of the big problems that I do just want briefly to point to is that the open access world has created a lot of journals that we refer to as predatory journals. So these are journals which will send out emails to a vast number of people and say, we've created a journal, it's a high quality journal, we'll publish your article if you give us so much money. Now, be really, really careful of those kinds of journals and any email like that, because any journal that is asking you for a payment prior to peer review or prior to publishing or prior to accepting it is probably a predatory journal. They're probably a journal that is not going to bring any distinction to your article or to your ideas. So if you're interested in a journal, make sure you do your research on it. Make sure you see where their editorial office is, who their editorial board members are. Do they require payment before peer review? Because remember, under Gold Open Access, you only pay once your article has been peer reviewed and has been certified for acceptance. So those are just some things to bear in mind in order that you are not caught. Metrics. Remember that what you're trying to do in publishing your article is to achieve the widest possible recognition for your ideas, for yourself, the greatest number of, the highest impact for your article. And this is just to point you to the fact many of you will know what an impact factor is. It's a system for assessing the impact of a journal based on its citations in other journals. It's owned and administered by a company called Clarivate. Google Scholar has a similar system. So be aware that you really do need to take account of these. And next, on now to Chris, who's going to talk to you about books publishing.
Thanks, just remembering to unmute. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the process for book publishing with Cambridge and really any other university press. So at Cambridge, we publish each year about 1,500 new books every year, and they're a mixture. We publish research books, and by research books we mean world-class research that makes an original and significant contribution to the literature. And I would stress the importance of original and significant in that. So it's not enough that it's kind of it's good research. It has to be really kind of world-class that that meets our threshold of original and significant. We also publish textbooks, we also publish reference books, and in our medicine and engineering and computer science lists, we also publish practitioner guides. I'm assuming that most people on this webinar are at relatively kind of early stage, early career scholars, and primarily interested in research monographs. So I'm going to talk, I'm not going to talk about textbooks or other sorts of books, just focusing very much on research monographs. So you've got an idea for a book, you know, that you're keen to find out who the best publisher is for it and to get it published. So what's the thought process that you should go through? The first is very similar to the world of journals that Patrick was describing, is to do your homework. As I said at the beginning, there are lots and lots of different publishers, some big, some small. They've all got their particular strengths and things. So it's important to understand which publisher is going to suit you best. So as with journals, kind of talk to your peers, talk to your professors, see what books, who's publishing the books that you're regularly reading, to narrow it down, because unless a publisher is actually publishing in the area that you're publishing in, then they won't be interested in it. So do homework to work out who the best publisher is for it. Go onto their websites and find the names of the relevant editors. I mean, all publishers these days have got very good websites, and they will have little biographical details of the editors. We will describe the sorts of books that they're interested in acquiring. And having found the names of the relevant editors, don't be embarrassed about making personal contact. It's always much better to get a personal email. So I were always likely to respond much more positively to an email that's dear Chris Harrison, rather than dear Cambridge University Press. So get their names, get their email addresses, and write to them to tell them a little bit about the project you have in mind. Please don't assume that we're experts in your subject. We're kind of we deal with lots of different areas. We like to think that we're reasonably intelligent people, but we don't have PhDs necessarily in your subject areas. We're not up to date with the latest research, latest publications in the journals and so forth. So don't talk to us as if we're kind of an expert like your professor, but talk to us in simple language to give us an idea of why we should be excited about the work that you're doing. So to find ways of describing your work in non-technical language is really important, both at this initial stage and earlier on. At this stage, don't send us your full manuscript. We don't really have the capacity to evaluate a full manuscript blind, that we've received blind through the post, but send us instead a book prospectus. And in the next couple of slides, I will just describe a little bit about what we'd want in a book prospectus. So first of all, as with your journal article, think about the title. Don't try and go for a clever title with a pun, which you and maybe kind of 20 other people will understand, but the rest of the world will not understand. Think of a clear descriptive title that's got the keywords that are going to show up in all those Google searches that will enable people to discover and find your work. Give us a short summary of the aims and scope of the book and why you're thinking it's making those original and distinctive contributions. And again, don't be kind of overly technical in your language. Try and use words which will be readily understood. And then just give us a little bit of detail about what you're going to be covering. And typically when I was a commissioning editor and acquisitions editor, I would ask people to write down a table of contents with 200, 500 word abstract summaries for each chapter, and also talk about the kind of literature that you'd cite in each chapter. So it's not written in stone at this stage, but just this gives us an idea of the coverage and the kind of literature that you're going to be covering. Tell us a little bit about your target readership, and it's perfectly okay for research monographs. We totally understand these books are not going to be bestsellers, but we want to know why it's going to be important for your particular readership you have in mind. Talk a little bit about how your work relates to other work that's been published. It's not, as in the world of textbooks, a world of sort of a zero-sum game where, if your textbook is used, then the other one isn't. In the world of research monographs, they all kind of work together, so they all fit together. We don't have to say that your book is necessarily kind of better and going to do than other books, but we do understand how it relates to it and how your book is going to add to the literature. So it's going to be important for any professor putting together a reading list for a course. Will want to make sure that your book is going to be included on that. Give us a short autobiography. Don't send us, your full 20-page full academic CV with details of every single conference presentation and poster session you've given, but just give us a short 2-paragraph biography. If you've got them available, it's quite handy to see some sample chapters so that we can get a sense of your writing style, but that's not necessarily, it's not always necessary. But so it's useful to have them if you've got them. And very much unlike the world of journal publishers, it is okay, generally speaking, it's okay to send to several publishers at the same time. So I always encourage people to, authors who are asking me this question. I said, that's fine. I'm really happy for you to send to Oxford and Harvard and Princeton. All we need to know is that you are actually sending the book project to other publishers, so we have some sense of your timescale for a decision-making process. Some editors have different views, but generally speaking, in the world of book publishing, it is okay to send your proposal to multiple publishers at the same time. And my practical advice to you is that I think it makes good sense, because you don't know whether you're going to get an acceptance or a rejection. So it saves time, I think, and it's good practice for you to send to multiple publishers. Just let us know. So when we do these talks around the world, the two biggest areas of questioning that we get are how to turn a dissertation, a doctoral dissertation, into a book, and policies on edited volumes. So the next few slides, I'm just going to talk about dissertation. So I'm guessing a number of people on this call have recently kind of finished their PhDs. It's a great feeling, you know, and congratulations. You should be really, really proud of what you've done, because, you know, kind of spending 3-4 years of your time, often quite lonely, doing that research. It's a terrific achievement to have been awarded the PhD. So what we know that's good about dissertations is that we know that you've satisfied your examiners, that you've clearly got a very good understanding of all the previous scholarship that relates to your work, and that's a good thing. And we also know that in your particular discipline, in that particular subject, you are probably the world's #1 expert on that subject. So there's nobody else in the world who will know more about the subject of your PhD than you do. So those are two really good things. On the other hand, typically, it's not always true, but typically most doctoral dissertations are too narrow to justify a book length treatment. So our standard advice when we get asked this question is to say to the scholar, ask yourself honestly, do you think you really have got enough to say at this stage in your career to justify writing a book length? Might it not be better strategy for you to think about publishing a series of articles and papers? That way you can test your argument with a wider community, you can get feedback, you can get better name recognition as your name goes out. So our standard advice always is not to rush. As soon as you get that great feeling, you know, you've from the Viva and you've passed your PhD, don't rush straight away to try and get that published, but take some time to think about, say, kind of testing the argument out with papers, getting your name better known. But if you do want to go ahead and publish fairly early on as a book, there are some practical things you should think about. So to satisfy your examiners, you typically have to include you know, fairly extensive review and methodology chapters. Now, your examiners are really interested in that, but the rest of the world really isn't. So ask yourself, do you really have to include as much detail in the book on your literature reviews and your methodology chapters as you had to do for your examiners? And in most cases, it's there's scope to kind of either get rid of them completely or to make them much shorter. Really, really important is to think about how you can add topics to your dissertation to broaden the scope of the book, to make sure that it tells a bigger story, that it can joins with a wider range of literature. So don't feel that you just have to reproduce exactly what you've got in your dissertation. If there's scope to do a little bit more research, to add a little bit more content, to make maybe it more comparative, if it's a historical work, to give it a slightly longer historical chronological coverage, think of ways you can do that, because it will, in the long run, it will make the book more impactful. It'll do your career a greater service if you can broaden the scope of the book. And think of all these things before approaching a publisher. Don't just send us your dissertation and say your examiner's recommended being published. Think about these things that you can do to turn a great dissertation into a great book, and think about those before, and we'll be pleased to advise you. There's a lot of uncertainty, I think, in the academic world about the exact status of edited books. Quite skeptical about taking on edited books and have a general policy of not taking them on. At Cambridge, we have a very pragmatic view. We don't think that kind of one author good, 12 authors bad. We just want to be satisfied that that whether the book has got, say, one author or 12 authors, that it meets our standards, our quality standards. So if you're thinking of putting together an edited collection, your role as the editor is absolutely crucial to make sure that an interesting set of papers is turned into a successful book, that the whole is more than the sum of the parts. So things to think about how to achieve that is, first of all, is coherence. Make sure that all the chapters in the book speak to each other. Make sure that all the authors in your collection have all read each other's chapters, that they reference, they do lots of cross-referencing, so that way you can ensure, as I say, that the books together, the chapters together, will add up to more than just an interesting collection. And secondly, your role as editor is to make sure that there is consistency in terms of quality, the technical level, the length. It's very frustrating, I think, to come across collections where you jump from one chapter that's 30 pages to another chapter that's 5 pages, one chapter that's sort of full of technical algebra, another chapter it's all kind of written in non-technical language. So as an editor, it's really important that you kind of set guidelines to ensure that all your authors are writing to a consistent style. Next, further responsibilities as an editor. It's your role to provide an introduction and a conclusion. The introduction should justify the rationale for why all those chapters are there, which will and to help readers understand the bigger picture. And not all edited books have a conclusion, but I think the best ones do. If you can again kind of wrap it all up and show the added value to readers of the collection. Sorry about that. Clear instructions to your authors. There are a lot of publishers publish conference books, and I think that's the area where we see kind of biggest variation in quality. And frankly, at Cambridge, we are very, very skeptical of conference books in the humanities and social sciences. But as I say, we kind of wouldn't say no out of hand, but we would want to see that the conference book has benefited from a lot of prior planning and briefing ahead of the conference to ensure that papers coming from it will work as a book. As an editor, you have to be quite tough with some of your colleagues. You have to say no to them if their chapters don't fit. If colleagues are late writing, you have to be prepared to kick them off the team. So it's quite a role, quite a lot of responsibilities being an editor. I think good editors can good edited books are really, really valuable. They can do things which we can't do in single authored books. But as I say, to succeed, then your role as an editor is really, really important. Next slide. So the review process, and here the procedures, the basic stages are pretty similar to journals, but a bit different in some ways. So there are two, as in journals, there are basically two stages of review. There's a desk review stage. So this is where the in-house editor, so one of my colleagues is a commissioning editor for one of the lists, receives a proposal through his or her email, and they will make a judgment about whether that proposal is appropriate for their list. So they will do it based on whether they're publishing in that subject area, how impressed they are by the what the author is putting in in that prospectus letter. Does it look kind of convincing, and so forth. So the desk review stage within book publishing is where we have probably the highest rejection rate. So my colleagues who are publishing in English literature and philosophy and history, where they're receiving every day, literally every day, they will get a good number of unsolicited proposals will come through the post, through the email system. They are having to reject an awful lot of papers that a lot of book projects at that stage, simply because the books don't quite fit their lists and they don't have the capacity to take those all on. So the desk review stage is quite a high rejection rate, but having made the decision to go ahead, we then go to peer review, and again, this is exactly the same principles as in the journal world. Typically at this stage, we will want to send out either a full manuscript or a good number of sample chapters to referees. In the book publishing world, to my knowledge, it's almost always single blind. We at Cambridge ask for 2 to 3 reviews per project, but if it's interdisciplinary, we may have more reviews. The outcome of those review decisions are the same as in journals: decline, accept, decline, or revise and resubmit. And as in the journal world, I'd say the majority of book proposals probably go through a revise and resubmit process. For our point of view at Cambridge, it's a big investment of our time and money, because unlike in the journal world, we actually pay referees, and if ever you are ever asked to referee book projects by publishers, it's not unreasonable to expect some payment either in cash or, more typically these days, a credit for some works. So it's difficult for us because our referees are all busy people, and so we spend a lot of time. A large part of the work of an editor is involved in finding good referees for manuscripts. The decision-making process is not scientific. Referees seldom agree with each other, so we have to make. It's sometimes very difficult to make a judgment, but it's still nonetheless the best system that we have. We aim typically to try and get this review process done in 6 to 12 weeks, but 12 weeks can turn into 24 weeks. As I say, referees are very busy. So you've got your referee comments back from your publisher, and I think these comments apply every bit as much to journals, journal reviews, as they do to book reviews. The first #1 thing is to be really respectful of the time and care that referees, who are all busy people, they all, there's plenty of other ways they could have spent their time other than reading your work and engaging with it. But they've agreed to do that. So first of all, be really respectful of what they've done for you. Engage positively and constructively with criticisms. Don't be defensive or aggressive. So don't come back to your kind of journal editor or your book editor and say these referees are idiots. They don't understand that kind of my work is pure genius. But try and respond, as I say, constructively. It's okay to disagree with a referee. We don't expect you to agree with all the criticisms, but we would expect you to justify those areas where you're standing your ground and you're respectfully disagreeing with them. After peer review process, and this is again slightly different, I think, to the world of books to journal publishing, is that we do also have to consider whether there's a market or not. And as I said at the beginning, at Cambridge, we are expected to generate some money for the university. So it's not enough for us for a book to be of the highest academic quality. We also have to be confident that we can sell at least our minimum kind of sales quantities to make the kind of return that we would expect. In the world of university presses, commissioning editors, generally speaking, don't have authority to offer you a contract. In the world of commercial publishers, I think it is more possible for an editor to offer a contract on the spot. But in the university presses, the project then has to go to an editorial board for approval. Next slide, please. So then finally, I just really want to say, and again, this applies to journals as every bit as much as books. So in the academic world, it's really important to understand that everybody gets rejected. And a few years ago, I was doing writing a paper on the peer review process and came across this book. It's a collection of recollections of leading economists, many of whom, some of whom went on to win the Nobel Prize, reflecting on their experience of having papers rejected by, in this case, by economics journals. So it's part and parcel, it's part of the academic world, is that you are going to get rejected. And the important thing is to learn from that process, work out how you can improve your project, your paper or your book project, so that it will be be kind of stronger next time. Just because it's rejected, it doesn't mean that it's no good. As I say, there have been cases of papers which went on to form the basis of Nobel Prize citations that got rejected at that early stage. So don't be despondent when you get rejection letters, because it is absolutely part and parcel of the academic life. So my final two slides, I think, are just to talk about a new publishing format that we launched a couple of years ago, called Cambridge Elements, in which we try and combine the best features of books and journals. Because for 400 or 500 years, if you're a scholar, you've had a choice of writing up your research in a short journal article, typically under 10,000 words, or in long form book, 100,000 words. But we know that there's lots of really interesting stuff that can be said better at a intermediate length. So Cambridge Elements are longer than a journal article, shorter than a monograph, 20 to 30,000 words. We organise them, as in the world of journals, in series edited by top scholars. We have very high standards of peer review. We publish them, first of all, as a digital publication where they can benefit from functionalities such as inline video and audio. And we're now also able to embed code and data. But we also make them available in paperback because, you know, people still like print, and we publish them very quickly in 12 weeks. So we're really excited about that. We've just started, and encourage you to look out. I think now we're pretty much at the end of the books and journals section. Just to remind you that, you know, can always think about the thousands of other people who are writing. How are you going to make your work distinctive, discoverable? So, you know, kind of your titles, your abstracts, making sure you've chosen the right journal, making sure you've chosen the right book publisher are all really important. And also, I think these days, your own social media activity is really important in, you know, in promoting and publicising your work. I'm now going to hand over to Patrick for a couple of minutes to before we cover Q&A session.
Thanks, Chris. I don't have a great deal to add. I'm aware that we want to leave as much time as possible for questions. So if you just go on to the next slide, Stefano. The one thing I did just want to bring to your attention, and that is that, you know, for those people for whom English is not the first language, I mean, clearly most of you will be very fluent in English and won't have difficulties with this. But for some people for whom that is the case, what we cannot do for you is we cannot rewrite your articles, because we simply don't have the resource for that. But we do work with a third-party company called American Journal Experts, and this organization does provide assistance to people to help you to reshape your article for the right journal, to make sure that the message comes across effectively, etc., etc. Now, one thing to say about them is that you kind of get what you pay for. So if you pay them very little, obviously they will intervene very little with your article. The more you pay them, the more you will get them to intervene. It's worth going to their website and just seeing what they do if you think that you need help in this area. But as I think I said to you at the beginning of my bit of the presentation, it's always worth talking to other people who have published articles in journals, or indeed speak to your supervisor to get advice on this sort of thing. Now, we also do publish a number of books at Cambridge. These are books for new authors, and it's really well worth taking a look at these, at least on the internet, or going to your library, because many libraries will have purchased a copy of these books. These books are full of useful tips on what to do, and so importantly, what not to do. Things that you should be careful of, you know, pitfalls and hurdles, etc., etc. The one that I do know very well there is the Handbook for Academic Authors by Beth Louie, which I think is now in something like its 8th edition. Gives you some sense of how successful that book has been. But all of these books will bring something to the party. So do go and look them up in the library and spend a little time with them, and you're bound to benefit. Right, next one. Okay, so that's merely to say thank you, but I did then want to just point you to a couple of of additions that we've made at the end, and Chris will has put there a whole list of books which have been published by authors based at Tel Aviv University, or indeed even in Israel, and it's just worth your taking a look at these to give you a sense of confidence as to what people in your institution, what scholars in your institution have achieved. I should also mention, I haven't given any specific journals information here, but we publish one journal out of Israel at the moment. It's called the Israel Law Review. It is actually published out of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. But at Tel Aviv University, we have 30 scholars who are members of Cambridge journals. So they are on the editorial boards of Cambridge journals. And if you're interested in any one of these journals, it's always worth going to have a chat with one of these editorial board members. You will also see that my email address and Chris's email address is there. So feel free, if you've got a journals question, to send it to me. If you've got a books question, send it to Chris. And then finally, before we get on to questions, I just did want to say one thing, and I don't know whether this applies to Chris as much as it applies to me, but I'm aware that this is the first time we presented these slides as a webinar. And generally, we have a crowd of people in front of us, and I guess, the way in which we do these things is slightly different when you're not in lockdown, as it were, and it's not a virtual event. So some thoughts about how to improve these slides has certainly come to me in presenting them now, and I think I'm certainly going to make some changes and improvements to them. But indeed, if you've got any ideas as to how they might be improved, please tell us. I'm certainly well aware, in respect of open access, for example, that it's a world that's moving fast. It's a complicated world. It's not settling down. In many ways, it's becoming more complicated. And I think the complication comes through those slides rather at the expense of some of the kind of central, rather more simple ideas. So I'll certainly attempt to do those. Anyway, Chris and I will both be off mute, so you guys must now just fire questions at us and we'll do our best to answer them.
Patrick, can I ask you a question, which I know when I've done these presentations on behalf of journals as well, that question I get asked a lot, is kind of the tactics for deciding, in any field there's a hierarchy of journals, and what are the tactics for deciding how ambitious should you be in where you send your paper, given that you can only send one to one journal at a time? Should you try and go for the top, the sort of the top tier journal, or is there a case for going for a slightly lower tier journal first?
Right, that's a good question, Chris, and I'm sure a lot of people will appreciate hearing my thoughts on that. I think just to reiterate what you said, Chris, and what I said at the beginning, the key thing is just to get a little bit of advice first. Talk to your supervisor, talk to people you've done research with about which journal they think is appropriate for a particular article. Now, there is the distinction between a general journal, that is one that publishes across the spectrum in the subject area, or a very narrow specific journal. Now, if you think that your article, whatever discipline you're in, is speaking to the wider discipline, let's just say you're an economist and you're writing on inequality, and you really are talking to a broad range of micro and macroeconomists, then you will probably want to go for a general journal like the American Economic Review or Econometrica or the Journal of Political Economy. If, however, it is a very narrow technical article on a very specific aspect of inequality, then you may want to look at a journal that is very much focused on the community of scholars that is writing on inequality. So I think the first thing to do is to talk to somebody, think about how general and how specific it is. But to get to the crux of your question then, Chris, it's this question of, do you go for the top journal, or do you go for a mid-tier journal, or do you go for a low-level journal? This is very much a judgment that you are going to have to make, and try to think in terms of how significant your findings are, how substantial is the work how new is it? And again, taking advice on this will be important. I imagine for your first article, you really want to go to a journal where you think you are going to get the best peer review, where you're going to get the best advice, because there is a chance that your article won't be accepted. And in not being accepted, in being rejected, what you want to do is to place yourself in the best possible position to get it accepted at the next journal you go to. And the way you do that is by getting good peer review. So I would say choose optimally in the middle. Don't go for a low-level journal. Don't go for the very best journals where they're very high rejection rates, but go for one where you think you're going to get good advice, good peer review, maximizes your chances of being accepted, but gives you the good peer review, so you massage the article into something that is better.
Thanks. I see in chat we've got a question from Ilana Wattenberg about how much experience we have working with non-Latin script. I'm working on medieval Hebrew science, also Arabic sources in an English monograph. So it's I mean, at Cambridge we have a number of lists which kind of working with written sources in Arabic and ancient Greek, and obviously in Hebrew as well. So we do have some specialist people in our production department who, and I think this is probably the case in journals as well, who understand the technicalities of the kind of the typesetting process for that. But it's something which I think I would, when you're talking to publishers, I would kind of flag that early on, because it's not a capability that all publishers will have. But on the whole, I would imagine that most of the bigger university presses, that because of their commitment to research publishing, that if they are publishing, certainly in sort of classical early medieval history, that they will have some commitment to at least trying to incorporate it. Patrick, do the journals?
Yes, Ilana, very much so. Any journal in this area will be, will have experience of working in non-Latin scripts, and indeed will for the most part be very happy to typeset those scripts. Clearly, when you submit an article, if it is of interest to the editor, they will advise you as to what the optimal amount of non-Latin script is. But our typesetters are set up for it, and indeed, if our journals publish in that particular area, you can be rest assured that you'll get good advice on it. So don't let that hold you back.
Oh, hi, it's Stefano here. I just wanted to mention, since we spoke about OA publishing, I just wanted to mention that I added a link in the chat, and on that page you will find very useful information about a deal that has been struck by Cambridge University Press and the Malmad Israeli Consortium, of which Tel Aviv University is a member. So basically, because of that deal, authors affiliated to Tel Aviv University can publish OA free of charge in our OA journals. So that is very important, and you will find lots of useful information via that link.
Good, thank you for mentioning that, Stefano. I think when I redo these slides, I'm going to have to make mention of read and publish deals, because as I mentioned a few minutes ago, this open access world is becoming increasingly complicated. So I think an explanation of what a read and publish deal means and how it applies to article processing charges is quite important. But another thing that I might mention in this respect, following on from what you've said, Stefano, is another group of people that is really worth talking to you if you're publishing a journal article is your librarian. You will be amazed at how much knowledge and experience in this area your librarians will have about pointing you in the right direction, telling you sometimes what to do, sometimes what not to do. So don't underestimate the value of the librarian in this respect as well. Are there any more questions? No, doesn't look like it.
So it's one
from Spencer.
Yeah, so a few friends have been offered advanced contracts by university presses for their projects. Are such contracts worth pursuing for early career scholars? Yes, I think so. I mean, I'm assuming this is for books, and as I was saying in the book review process, we sometimes review on the basis of a prospectus and some sample chapters, and in those cases we will offer a book publishing contract with the publication conditional on the final manuscript being read and approved by a referee. That doesn't mean that publishers are looking for an excuse to revisit their decision to offer a contract. It's just a way that we can ensure, and working with the authors to polish the manuscript to make sure that it really is as good as it possibly can be. So yeah, I think an advanced contract by university press is a good thing to have. Obviously, you've got to then deliver on the manuscript and go through that final review process. At Cambridge we call it a clearance review, and a good percentage of our projects, particularly in the social sciences, go through that route. And in the humanities areas, typically contracts are more generally offered on the basis of a reading of the full manuscript, but not always the case. So there's nothing wrong with an advanced contract from a good university press. I would congratulate your friends. I think it's a good thing to have. So if, as Patrick said, we've got our email addresses on the slides. The slides will be, I think, be made available to everybody. We're happy to take questions offline as well. But thank you for putting up with. This is our first ever kind of webinar, Patrick and I've done. So I hope it's been useful. Good luck to everybody in whatever stage in their careers you are. Please do consider Cambridge as a publisher for your book projects, and if you're kind of journal papers. As I say, it is a complicated world, but I hope that the kind of the slides that we've gone through today will help you kind of navigate it with a little bit more kind of confidence in the future. And so I say best of luck to everybody and stay safe. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Chris, and thanks from me to everyone. Don't hesitate to get in touch if you've got a question, and if we can't provide the answer, we'll certainly put you in touch with someone who can. I do see that Ella has got her hand up. Ella, do you want to ask your question or write it down? No, Ella's taken her hand down. Okay, so Stefano, I'll leave you to say thank you and goodbye, and then we can sign off.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you everybody for participating. Thank you very much, Patrick and Chris, for speaking to us about this. And from the comments in the chat, I can see that this was very much welcome, and I'm sure it's been very useful for everybody.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
All the best.
Bye.